Welcome to Monograph Matters. I'm talking today with Mayra Bámaca, author of the SRCD Monograph on place-based developmental research, conceptual and methodological advances in studying youth development in context. This discussion focuses on exemplar incorporation of monograph recommendations and contribution to developmental science. Mayra, how does your exemplar incorporate recommendations from the monograph?
Well, the monograph definitely has a lot of complexity in addressing different aspects that we need to look more in depth when we try to understand development and adjustment in children, youth, and more broadly families. I'm going to speak to a couple of the different things that the monograph highlights and how the exemplar that we have on Latino families in some ways incorporates these ideas. So for sure, we look at time. We are looking at activity space of both Latino or Latina adolescents and their caregiver. And we are trying to also understand not only the places that they navigate, but the places that they navigate, hopefully together at the same time. So these are different when it comes to activity space. So you can have shared time and shared space, especially shared space can be the same places are navigated, are visited by the two family members, but perhaps not at the same time. And in this exemplar, we definitely are trying to look at both. And when it comes to levels and settings, activity space gives us the opportunity to look at the overall mesosystem, or what the monograph actually kind of refers to the totality of the day-to-day microsystems that both youth and their parents or caregiver navigate. Now, we did this only for a week, so we definitely are constrained as to how much they navigated spaces within that week. But why is this an important thing to know in terms of Latino families? Well, Latino families that we were studying for this exemplar are residing in new destinations, in a city, in a new destination, or consider a new destination because they are only 20% of the population in that city. In comparison to the actual population, more broadly speaking, which is about over 50% Black. And so these Latinos are in a very different context than you would consider in many, many places here, for example, in California, where Latino families are a large majority in many communities. So we wanted to know more about, like, how are these families adjusting? Are they navigating spaces just within their neighborhood, or also navigating spaces outside of the neighborhood? And for me, it was kind of very interesting to figure out, and we haven't done this analysis yet, but one of the things that I'm really curious about is whether the families that we followed for that 1 week were staying more close to their neighborhood, or were they navigating in a wider space, especially because while that city only has 20% of Latinos, or about roughly 20%, there are some cities 1 hour, 1.5 hours away that actually have 50-60% Latino. So I can imagine that for some of these families, they might be navigating to these spaces where there are a lot of more Latinos around, probably more stores, more places that they can visit where there's a lot of Latino presence. And that may have implications for different aspects of Latino adolescent development. So one of the things that we know is that ethnic racial socialization is critical for developing a strong sense of identity, ethnic racial identity. And ethnic racial identity is a very important contributor or protective factor against many of the stressors and experiences that adolescents have in their lives. So we can imagine that some families, if they have the financial means, and they may have a car, because that's also important to consider, that they may really navigate to these other spaces where there are a lot more Latinos. So we're looking at time, we're looking at levels and settings, and trying to really understand more broadly all the mesosystems that these Latino families are visiting, because these mesosystems, maybe the smaller, the larger the mesosystem, in some ways is going to affect family dynamics, parent-child relationship domains, and exposures for sure. So that's sort of some of the ways in which we, in the exemplar, are using some of the ideas of the monograph.
Mayra, the idea of shared time and space between adolescents and caregiver is intriguing. However, it is not a new idea for development science. So how does this exemplar incorporating a place-based perspective advance developmental science current knowledge base with regard to the dyad and the shared activities, time, and space?
Well, that's a very good question, by the way. So you're correct. We're not the first to talk about a study of time that adolescents spend with their families, right? There is some seminal work by Rick Larson, and actually more recent work by Kim Opdegraff and colleagues, who are actually specifically focusing on Mexican American families that have paved the way in this regard. So we do know that adolescents are spending time with their families, that this time spent together is important for their well-being. But I think that what is exciting is that with the technological advances that we have now, this idea of activity spaces, especially when we are using GPS, because there are different ways to measure activity space. You can actually do a self-report. But with GPS, we have now the opportunity to not rely on self-reports or recalling, participants recalling, but actually collect this information objectively. Or we might be able to combine both objective measures like GPS, where we're tracking each 30 seconds of a person's movements, or combine objective and subjective measures, and also incorporate ecological momentary assessments, where we can actually every so often during the day ask adolescents and the families or participants, parents, caregivers, you name it, ask them about the perceptions of those places where they are during the day. So I think that this is one of the ways in which we are adding to the work on activities, on shared spaces or time spent together. Now, the other thing that I feel like we in some ways are doing that perhaps prior research was not able to do as much is that we're not just paying attention to the time spent together, which is definitely really critical, but where they're spending this time together, right? And from hopefully the other videos that are featured in this monograph, you will learn that activity space, it extends beyond the neighborhood context. And there's a lot of research that talks about the impact of the neighborhood. But less do we know about other places that individuals visit on a daily basis or weekly basis that also may have an impact on development, adjustment, and just living daily life. And so what I like about the activity space idea is that we are able to not only tap into where they are, if they are together, but we can actually look at the structural characteristics of those spaces. And if they're spending time in the neighborhood, we can definitely retrieve information from the census data that can give us a little bit more information about the structural and social characteristics of the activity space. So we can look at the number of liquor stores, for example, or number of arrests in a certain area, number of green areas, parks available in that activity space, not just of the child, but also of the family or the parent, and also the shared activity space that the two of them have together. And I think that this is important to look at because shared activity spaces, if you think about the dyadic aspect of it all, can have implications on certain measures that we use to tap into certain parenting dynamics. So for example, when it comes to monitoring, some of the measures that we have of monitoring are asking parents and adolescents if the parents are asking questions about the whereabouts of the kids, or if the kids are actually sharing with their parents about where their day-to-day reality. Well, if they're spending a lot of time together, some of these conversations may not really be happening because the parent knows where the kid is at, right? So if the whole weekend the kid doesn't go anywhere, then when we are asking parents, did you ask questions to your child about today and what they've done and who they've been with, or do you know who the child is with? Well, of course they're going to say yes, or sometimes they may say no, not because they don't do it, it's because they are together, and that decreases perhaps the questioning of where have you been, what are you doing? You know what they're doing. They're probably upstairs at home, helping out, cleaning, going to the store with the parents. So I think that in that regard, also, we are advancing the understanding of shared time. What does shared time mean? Where is that shared time happening? And understanding better the structural aspects of those spaces that these families are embedded in. If it's a neighborhood, the residential neighborhood, those characteristics may be very different than the larger activity space of the family. For example, I think that this was mentioned before, but families of low SES may travel outside of their neighborhood for better resources or for just accessing resources. And so we will not be able to know that unless we actually follow these families and their whereabouts on a day-to-day basis. So in that regard, I feel like, yes, we have known for years that time with families is important, but I also think that the places where these families are together can also have important implications for understanding better what matters and how places affect not just the child, but also the family dynamics, the parenting that we do in the well-being of the child and the parent.
Read more about this topic in the monograph issue, Place-Based Developmental Research, Conceptual and Methodological Advances in Studying Youth Development in Context, by Witherspoon, White, Bámaca, et al. If you like this video, consider watching our Monograph Matters playlist. For additional resources related to this and other issues of the monographs of the Society for Research in Child Development, please visit monographmatters.srcd.org.